here in Lincoln with Marc Jones, who is the recently re-elected Lincolnshire PCC and now the chair of the APCC, elected by your peers, the fellow police and crime commissioners. And here, did you say Cornhill, this particular area?
Yes, this is Cornhill in Lincoln.
So we've got some delightful areas of Lincoln, I believe, to look forward to as we move around here. This is a fairly recently developed area by the look of it, and very pleasant it is too. So Marc, let's press on. You were, as I mentioned, recently re-elected. You were in that election in May the Police and Crime Commissioner who had the biggest majority. You got 60% of the votes, so literally a landslide. You must have felt quite chuffed at that.
Well, I suppose my ethos in all elected roles has been you start winning your next election the day after you won the last one. And so I'd spent 5 years leading up to that election doing my best to fulfil the duties I'd been given to do by the public, and hopefully some of that got through, but certainly taking my majority from 11,000 to over 70 in a single term was really good news.
So it takes some doing. So a real vote of confidence there, very much in terms of your the local impact that you have been making, and the electorate would quite rightly expect you to continue making. But you've now got these additional responsibilities as the chair of the APCC, and that's my hope is that we focus on that over the next 25 minutes or so. What do you hope to achieve then in your term as chair of the APCC? 1 year, is it?
Well, it's always been 1 year, and actually we've just changed the articles of the association to make it 2 year. And I think that's really important as the PCC role embeds and the association finds its feet, that actually you could spend the best part of that first year getting to know everybody that's in the landscape. By the time you've met everybody in the Home Office and everybody in the various organisations you have to work with, you're in danger of changing again. So we've changed it to 2 years, so I'll be the first PCC to do a 2-year term. And really what's important to me is making sure that some of the big pieces that are now moving at a national level around funding formula review, the Police and Crime Commissioner review, are dealt with as well as we can to get a system that really works for the public. But aside from that, building really strong partnerships. Our relationship with the local government association, county councils network, with government, with health. There's so many different areas that we need to just build those strong relationships to make us more effective.
Lots of stakeholders to deal with. Now, as we walk through this shopping area in Lincoln, I wasn't quite expecting that we were going to have this accompaniment here, and I hope he's not expecting any intellectual property payments by our recording. So we'll just go past. And there, so hopefully now beyond, and we can pick up your comments over the background music. So plenty of stakeholders to engage with, some of whom you'll already know from your previous term as Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner. So hopes for your 2-year term, presumably. I'm imagining it was at least to some extent a competitive election. Others would have been interested in the role as chair of the APCC.
Indeed, yes.
Very important role. So you may or may not have had a manifesto, but even if it was a virtual manifesto, what was on it? What are your specific? Do you have specific aims for that 2-year term as to what it is that you would wish to deliver?
Well, one of the key things from my point of view is to make sure that the APCC represents all PCCs, that every PCC understands that the 20 or so staff in the APCC are an extension of every one of our offices. So the purpose of the APCC in part is to help us all deliver our police and crime plans, which is very much down to everybody's local street level. And I think we need to make sure that that happens. We've got a lot of new PCCs and they'll need help and support along the way, as I did in my first term. And we need to make sure their association delivers for them. It is a membership organisation. One of the other things that I'm really keen to do is almost broaden it a little bit and consider it a police governance organisation. We do have non-elected bodies represented there. We've just welcomed back British Transport Police, for example, and it's really important. They're key partners. We need to work together to make sure that our collective voice is heard when we're shaping policy, but also to deliver effective policing on the ground. So I think there's a huge amount of things that we can do, but from my point of view, it's making sure that it's not just my view of the world, it's that collegiate, collective view of PCCs. It's their organisation, and I think that will be the way I'll look forward to this.
So the broadening beyond the Police and Crime Commissioner interest, you've mentioned British Transport Police there, and others. So from memory, the City of London is also represented. They don't have a Police and Crime Commissioner though. The Met and Greater Manchester, neither of whom have a PCC. They have, both of those have mayors.
Yes.
And looking to go beyond that, perhaps.
Well, my personal aspiration would be to go beyond that, but as I say, it's a membership organisation. It's something that we would need to discuss, but I would love it to be a UK-wide sort of British Isles organisation, because I think that adds strength to our voice.
So that would include potentially Police Scotland, the Police Service for Northern Ireland, PSNI, and at the risk of putting words in your mouth, which I know that you'll not let me, but you know, looking at the wider British Isles, there are other forces with their own governance across the British Isles that maybe might also be interested in some of the representation, some of the support, some of the expertise that comes out of the APCC team under its Chief Executive Susanna Hancock.
Exactly, and equally we would benefit from their experiences and knowledge and their very specific experiences. So from my point of view, it's not about trying to in any way muscle in on what they're doing already. It's about going, well, how can we work closer? How can we, you know, deliver an even better level of service for the public? So I don't think it's controversial in that sense, but equally, as I say, it is a membership organisation. It's not within my gift to dictate, but that would certainly be something I'd love to see.
So early days in your chairmanship of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, the APCC, it's something that I'd love to return to in maybe a year's time, once you've had an opportunity to consult further with your colleagues to understand how that's all going to move forward.
Well, just before we go on, I'll just point out we're just entering an area called the Strait, which is quite ironic because it's the start of the steep part, and then we'll go on to a steep hill. So as we get short of breath as we keep talking, that'll be why.
That'll be why. And the Strait here, S-T-R-A-I-T. I wish I could work out how to zoom in on this very small camera that I currently have attached to the end of a hiking pole, but hopefully we'll catch something of the, and I can see at the top what looks very much like Lincoln Cathedral.
It is. We'll be going up into Castle Square, and
we'll have a look at that in a moment or two. So that's the APCC chair role to an extent. There is one element that we've not touched on yet, which I now would like to bring in, and that is the Home Office's continuing review of the role of police and crime commissioners. They've completed stage one of that review, which perhaps a little dismissively, but I am going to say didn't conclude anything of world-shattering potential. If you want to push back on that, feel free. But otherwise, I'll come on to stage 2 of the review, which is starting up now.
I do think stage 2 is probably the meatier of the two, and in some respects I think the timing of the first one was challenging, coming as it did tight up against the PCC elections. So I think, would it have been better to have a little bit more time to develop that? Possibly, but actually I think the scope is there for the part 2 to be the real meat in the sandwich, really.
Let's come on to that. I'm just going to switch to your other side, because the sun is to our right, and I don't want the camera to be too dazzled by the sun. Better to have, as we move into the shade, of course. The stage 2 review that the Home Office is embarking on, it covers a very wide variety of areas, a part of which might be summarised as strengthening and expanding the role of police and crime commissioners. So let's start with that element. As the chair of the APCC, I guess you're in favour of that?
Well, I think it's got to ultimately be, does this improve things for the public? Does it improve services? And if the answer's no, we shouldn't be doing whatever it is. So it's not about a land grab by PCCs. It's the government's view that having a single elected entity that can be held to account by the public is more democratic and has already proven to deliver positive change. So with that in mind, I think that's why they've looked to say, well, is there more we can do? And it's really clear that the and crime bit of police and crime commissioners is underdeveloped. The frustrations through COVID about getting data, for example, around courts, there's things we can improve, but it's not about trying to fetter the independence of the judiciary or utterly give everything to PCCs. It's about how we improve systems to make things better for the public.
So very much with the benefits to the public in mind. That said, then, what areas of potential benefits to the public might come from strengthening and expanding? What specifics might there be?
Well, I mean, one of the areas that a lot of PCCs want to see improvement is around the criminal justice system. I think it's clear, if you are accused of crime, if you are a victim of a crime, the system doesn't necessarily deliver of its best for anybody, and I think that's something we want to work to improve. So whether there are opportunities to provide more oversight through PCCs, I think there probably are, but every single PCC I've ever spoken to is clear that does not mean getting involved with the independence of the judiciary. We're all really of one mind on that, but there's a difference between interfering with their independence and just asking for data and information about outcomes to help improve things. And that, I think, is a really important element.
So it has been certainly on the cards for a few years now that police and crime commissioners might get more involved in the criminal justice side, whether that interfaces with the Ministry of Justice or the Probation Service or offender management. So if you had more, as I think we've conquered the bulk of that hill. Apologies if the sound of my heavy breathing distracted too much on that climb, but the offender management side, what if you had some responsibility for offender management or offender interaction here in Lincolnshire, as the Lincolnshire PCC, what sorts of things would you like? Do you see that there be benefit for the people of Lincolnshire in your being more involved in that?
Well, a couple of examples already. I mean, I was one of the places that ran the pilot scheme looking at tagging for alcohol abstinence tags. where alcohol was a major element of people's offending. That was a huge success. It really made a big difference. You know, people on the programme had said it had changed their lives. So we're already getting involved in reducing offending programmes. And so I would definitely look to those kind of things. I also have paid for an extra supervisor and transport to do more unpaid work programmes for offenders, and we know that that programme's hugely successful. 80% of people that do unpaid work programmes don't reoffend within the first 12 months. So those kind of things PCC's already getting involved in, and we would just like to have probably a little bit more in our armoury to be able to actually get things moving. So at the moment it's very much reliant on the willingness of others to allow us into that space, and we feel probably it would be better if we just had a little bit more on our side to actually say, you know, we want to make this different. There needs to be some kind of power to get them to work with us.
So I'd like to come back to that, but we're just entering Lincolnshire Castle grounds now, I think.
Lincoln Castle.
Lincoln, I beg your pardon, Lincoln Castle. And just so coming back to that, why do you think?
And the courts at the end there, so that
it looks fantastic. Now I have never been in this area before, and I thought I'd certainly been to Lincoln Cathedral and other such places, but on the offender management side, why do you think that PCCs could make a difference here? Because frankly, surely the opportunity was there before PCC's involvement to make this sort of difference.
Well, there always is an opportunity. The difference that having a PCC has made is you've got a single point of contact. Okay, you've got a single point of failure if it goes wrong, but you are accountable as an individual. And actually, it's much easier for the convening power of a PCC to say, actually, I want to meet with the head of probation, I want to meet with the prison governor, I want to bring them together with the chief constable, and we're going to work together to look at something new. And I think the difficulty was, under police authorities, clearly that wasn't what they were for, but even if they were minded to do that, the committee structure just doesn't lend itself to being able to do those kind of things. So I think that's where the advantage is with a single point of contact.
So the buck stops with you.
Absolutely.
The responsibility stops with you or your counterparts, and the electorate in what is now 3 years' time will hold you accountable for
Absolutely.
whether or not you've delivered.
And I think one of the challenges we have with that is the things that the public hold us accountable for is still underdeveloped. So one of the things that was obvious through the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any candidate who puts their name forward, I think actually it should be law that everybody in our country should have to stand for an election of some kind at some point, so they can understand the terrifying nature of that exposed position when the public go, we don't like what you're doing, how you're doing it. You know, it's a fascinating process. So I'm not criticising any candidate that puts their name forward, but it was clear that a lot of candidates around the country hadn't got the first idea what a PCC did.
Candidates, not the electorate, but so candidates.
What you have is candidates standing on a platform of saying they'll deliver things that they physically can't, undermining the role by saying, well, their key policy objective is to slash their own salary or do things that clearly aren't about adding value to the role and the public, but literally just undermine the existence of the role. And is it any wonder, therefore, that the public get confused about what we do, why we do it? And I think that makes it hard for them to make a judgment about whether we're successful. And nobody was talking about reducing reoffending or different programmes that had been delivered. It was a very basic set of things about policing.
I suppose if I for the moment put myself in the shoes of other candidates, looking for the topics that would resonate with the electorate.
But most of them around the country hadn't even took the time to meet the chief exec of the APCC or the chief constable.
Okay, and so let alone the chair or others of the local criminal justice board or the community safety partnership or the violence reduction unit or a whole bunch of other key stakeholders in the work that a police and crime commissioner actually does. Another area that is mentioned within the I'm glad you're directing me. You're in charge of steering here rather than me. But another area that is a part of the Home Office's review is to look at the governance of police and crime commissioners themselves.
Yes.
So again, I may just change side here on the basis that the sun is now that more that sort of way. But so police and crime panels are the mechanism which provides oversight of the work of individual police and crime commissioners. In effect, a body of approximately a dozen individuals who are typically made up of local councillors, plus perhaps one or two other independent co-opted individuals. So some feeling that the panels have not performed as effectively as they were originally envisaged to do, some concerns about the handling of complaints against police and crime commissioners, some, dare I say, even many of which may be without foundation or with very little foundation, and others very serious matters indeed.
Yes.
Where instances where one or two elected PCCs not only accused of but demonstrably lacking in their the way in which they've behaved and beyond, so into criminal, certainly civil related matters, that it's been difficult to get rid of those police and crime commissioners. So your thoughts on the panels, the overall complaints handling and the like?
Yeah, I think it's a really important element, and it's fair to say, in the same way that chiefs and PCCs should have a healthy tension, there should be times when your views are aligned, there will be times when you have to challenge appropriately. That same relationship will exist with the PCC and the panel. What's difficult is that, to my knowledge, most PCCs try their very best to respect operational independence, understand that through the APCC we work cross-party with other PCCs. As soon as you bring in a governance structure that is made up of councillors representing their local government organisations, you make it political. By the nature of it, you've put a room full of elected people together, some of whom might have wanted your job, some of whom might have aspirations to have your job, and all of a sudden you've changed the environment. And I think it becomes difficult to see what is scrutiny and supportive, and equally what is going into a different space entirely. So there are tensions there that I think we haven't got right, and that's not to say that panels are all bad, they're clearly not, and actually it is an opportunity for a PCC to publicly explain what it is they're up to, so that isn't a bad thing. I think the structure around independent members can be done better. So for example, if you co-opt 2 independent members onto your panel, there is very little point, in my view, in co-opting 2 people in the image of the other 12 that are already on the panel. So where's the voice of the victim? Where's the diversity, inclusivity that's being created, which is the opportunity for me of having independents co-opted? You could say, well, what are we lacking as a panel, and how do we co-opt that? Rather than, let's bring somebody in that looks exactly like us, sounds like us, was an ex-cop like us, or whatever the background is. And I think that's something that needs to change. I do think there's a quality issue, in the sense that, is the quality of training given to panel members sufficient? That's not the panel members' fault, but I think nationally we need to recognise that we live and breathe this as PCCs. They're busy folk, they're doing all sorts of other council stuff. Why would they know as much about it as we do? And the other question for me is there even a regionalisation of panels to make them more professional? So do you have an East Midlands police and crime panel that, you know, is probably a more paid position, therefore the quality goes up, you could deliver an entirely different kind of proposition, and then all of the East Midlands PCCs will have their meetings through that.
Well, that would be fascinating, and I'm not entirely sure that your fellow PCCs will.
Well, they might not.
Well, they might not.
But that's just my view.
But it's so an opportunity there for the police and crime panel for the region to compare PCCs, and actually to look across the work of a number of police and crime commissioners.
And it's not to suggest that, well, why aren't you doing what Nottinghamshire are doing or Leicestershire are doing, but it would give them a wider strength and depth of knowledge and information on which to base their questioning and actually improve the outcomes for the public.
Very interesting idea. Yes, very interesting idea. Now, we've come to a halt in this area here. I think we made progress up. Is it called Steep Hill?
Steep Hill,
which is it's very much an accurate description of the hill.
And this is the Gardens of the Lawn, as it's called, which formerly was an institution for people that were held residentially that had mental health issues, but subsequently has found a new life. As a meeting venue. It's got retail, it's got coffee shop, so it's very much more a community space these days.
It's fascinating for me on this policing friendship tour, as I currently am, in some instances to go back to places that I've been 20-30 years ago and see the
change.
Very significant improvements, developments that have taken place, and certainly already that's the case here in Lincolnshire. There is one further area that I want to touch on before I come on to the charity side that I want to ask you about, and that's, you touched on it earlier on. Let's just walk a little further. So we'll head down to there is a bench over there. Not that I'm suggesting we're going to sit on the bench, but we're aiming that direction. You mentioned earlier on about data and the importance of data, and I'm pretty sure it was in connection with the criminal justice area that you as PCC, I'm sure the forces, the individual forces are good at providing their PCC with the data that they have available, and maybe the PCC challenging them to make the data even better. The suggestion, the inference is that the data available to you and maybe to the wider criminal justice sector isn't as good as it might be at the moment.
Well, I think it's not shared as widely as it might be, therefore it isn't joined up in the best possible way. I mean, the more data we can share with each other, the better we can put something together and say, well, actually, what works, what doesn't, where are the gaps, what are we going to do about that? And ultimately, that's all I'm interested in. It's not about criticising agencies because something isn't working well. It's about saying, well, we've identified that issue, what are we going to do about it together? And I think that's the bit that is probably alien to some agencies that aren't used to having elected people involved in their world. That it seems threatening to have somebody question and challenge, where actually it should be supportive, and equally, potentially, we're the ones going, well, let's fund a thing to improve that. So it should be seen as an added value to them. And I think one of the things that I've learnt as well is some of the services we commission are still nervous about using our full potential. So I will use this as an example. Restorative justice, which I'm a huge fan of. We commission it, we want it to be successful. If they get blockers to being able to get a victim the restorative justice they want, whether that's through probation or prison or whatever, I need them to come to me and tell me. I need them to say, look, I've got a blockage here, can you help? Not say, well, we've been commissioned to do this service, it's almost a weakness if we admit that we've failed in it. And I'm not saying that that's the situation that I face here, but I've heard of it, and I'm concerned that people don't always see how to get the most from a PCC.
And indeed, you and the force and the general public in Lincolnshire here have a very keen interest in those that have been existing offenders, that ways be found of discouraging them from persisting in that.
Yes.
And so, you know, you have a very, very keen interest, and Lincolnshire public, in that offender management side.
Yes.
And at the moment, what I understandably detect is a desire, indeed even a frustration, that you don't have the opportunity quite yet to influence that area as much as you, an elected individual, would find helpful.
I think that's fair to say, and it's making sure that some of the services join up. So we have some services commissioned directly by the Ministry of Justice, and historically what's happened is that they would suddenly fund something in your local area that we knew nothing about. They don't give it long-term sustainable funding, so it's 1, 2 or 3 year funding, and the message after that's run out is go and see your PCC. Now, it might be that the service that was initially put in place wouldn't be as I would have commissioned it to fill the gaps that we know exist. So then you've got a challenge. How do I work with this organisation that's trying to do brilliant work that doesn't quite fit what we need? We haven't got additional funding to provide to make it work. So it's some of those kind of things where we're trying to sort of work better with national government to avoid those kind of things, work with our providers locally so we understand the landscape, and ultimately the people that need that service, which are often very vulnerable people that have committed a crime. And let's be honest, a perpetrator on a Monday could be a victim of a crime on a Tuesday. Lives are complicated, and we have to provide services for all of that to try and protect our community.
I did, prior to that question, just forewarn or flag up that it was going to be about the charity that I'm now moved to. So it's become a tradition in these Policing Friendship Tour videos that I ask the individual that I'm walking with and videoing that particular day to mention one or more charities that are particularly dear to their heart. It doesn't need to be a policing related charity. It's entirely up to your policing related charities. Ideally with a little explanation as to why you've provided or mentioned that charity or charities. What, Mark, would those
be? I've long come to the realisation that there's a harsh reality about raising money, and that is, if you want to raise the most money, whatever your advert, put a puppy on the front of it. If you haven't got a puppy, put a child. You won't raise as much money as you had with the puppy, but you'll still get some. If you haven't got a child or a puppy, really hard to raise money. And so I've often championed charities that don't have children and puppies at the centre of their marketing, for want of a better term. And in particular, probably the most long-standing charity I've been supportive of in Lincoln is one called the Nomad Trust. They have worked tirelessly over a long period of time to tackle homelessness and support people at their lowest ebb, to help find them accommodation and actually support them in keeping accommodation. So the Nomad Trust is one that I've always supported, and alongside that, Edan Links, who are our incredible organisation who deal with domestic abuse locally, and again very hard for them to raise funds because people don't like to acknowledge that it exists in their community. So
domestic violence, of course, very
hugely problematic.
It's often a hidden harm rather than very visible.
It is, and actually we know it's underreported. I mean, we still get around 16,000 reports of it just in Lincolnshire alone in a year, and we know it can lead to homicide very tragically, and it's an awful thing. So, you know, the work they do is incredible. And the last charity I would mention is the Police Treatment Centre up in Harrogate, which is an incredible building, and it's there to, in effect, support officers that have become injured as a result of their duties, and that could be psychological, it could be physical, but actually, I mean, the entire purpose of it really is to get you fit and healthy again so that you can continue to serve your community, and also that you remain whole as a person, both physically and mentally. And the work they do is outstanding, and you know, I think it is really important that we support these charities that support the cops, that ultimately means they can support and deliver of their best for the community. So that would be my three.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure walking with you this morning here in Lincoln. I'm just going to pan the camera around a little, and so we've come through Lincoln Castle. We've got that former treatment centre, I think you said it was,
yes,
here with us, and the gardens associated with it. I think, as has become traditional, we're about to go and find an ice cream somewhere.
Excellent.
And I don't know what I'm going to do once it gets to the winter months. The ice creams may not be quite as in ready supply. Coffee sounds a better idea, but on this occasion it's going to be ice creams. Mark, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Brilliant to welcome you to Lincoln. Thank you for coming.